My sister was murdered. I know who did it, and I have proof.
She sat across the table from the man who murdered her sister. She smiled at him. She held his hand. She told him she loved him. And every single day, she was planning his destruction. This is not a story about a woman who was broken by grief. This is a story about a woman who turned grief into a weapon, and she was patient enough to wait 3 years to use it. She pretended to be in love with the man who killed her sister just to get her revenge. Stay with me, because by the time this story ends, you're going to question everything you thought you knew about justice, love, and what a human being is capable of when the person they loved most is taken from them. There is a specific kind of grief that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't collapse in the hospital hallway or scream at the casket. It sits very still. It watches. It calculates. It waits. And if you have never felt it, consider yourself fortunate, because the people who carry that kind of grief will tell you it is heavier than any other kind, because it is not just loss, it is loss mixed with the absolute certainty that someone, somewhere, is still breathing who should not be. That is the grief that lived inside Maya Caldwell from the morning she got the phone call about her sister, Leah, to the morning she walked out of a Buncombe County courtroom 3 years later with a verdict in her hand and the quiet, devastating knowledge that she had done it. She had actually done it. Not the police. Not the district attorney. Not the system built and funded and trusted to deliver justice. Maya alone. With nothing but patience, intelligence, and a willingness to do something that most people, if they are honest with themselves, could never do, not because they lack the intelligence, but because they lack the stomach for it. Because what Maya Caldwell did required her to look at the man she believed had pushed her sister off a 40-foot ridge on a cold October morning and make him feel safe, make him feel chosen, make him feel, of all the impossible things, loved. Before we go any further into this story, let us pause for just a moment. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because the stories we bring to this channel are not quick summaries. They are not headlines. They are full, complete accounts of the most extraordinary things real people have lived through. And this story is among the most remarkable we have ever told. To understand Maya Caldwell, you first have to understand Leah Caldwell. Because every single decision Maya made over the 3 years that followed Leah's death was made in Leah's name, in Leah's memory, and in the specific image of Leah's face that Maya carried with her every hour of every day, an image not from the end, not from the trail, not from the photographs that would eventually appear in court filings, but from a Tuesday afternoon the summer before Leah died, when the two of them had driven 2 hours to the North Carolina coast, kicked their shoes off on a public beach in Brunswick County, and sat in the sand eating gas station sandwiches and laughing so hard about something, neither of them could later remember that Leah had cried actual tears, and Maya had nearly choked, and they had both agreed it was one of the best afternoons of their lives. That afternoon, that image, that was what Maya Caldwell was protecting when she did what she did. Not an abstract idea of justice, not a legal principle, a real woman who had eaten a gas station sandwich on a Tuesday and laughed until she cried. Leah Caldwell was 32 years old when she died. She had grown up with Maya in Weaverville, North Carolina, a small town just north of Asheville in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And if you had asked anyone who knew her to describe her in a single sentence, most of them would have said some version of the same thing. She was the kind of person who made a room better just by being in it. She worked as a pediatric nurse at Mission Hospital in Asheville, and by every account she was extraordinary at it, the kind of nurse who remembered the names of patients' siblings and brought stickers to children who were afraid of needles and stayed 20 minutes past the end of her shift to sit with a mother who had just received devastating news about her child. She had a rescue dog named Chester, a chocolate Labrador with a torn ear and an enormous appetite. And she had a collection of ceramic owls lined up on the windowsill of her apartment that she had been building since she was a teenager. And she had a laugh that her colleagues at Mission Hospital described, independently of each other and without any coordination, as a disturbance which was always meant as the highest compliment. She was loud and warm and absolutely real, and she was the best friend Maya had ever had in her life. Maya was 3 years younger. She was quieter, more interior, the kind of person who listened more than she spoke and remembered everything she heard. She worked in marketing for a regional firm in Asheville and was, by her own description and the description of everyone who knew her, methodical. She kept spreadsheets. She read the fine print on contracts. She thought through consequences before she acted. Where Leah moved through the world the way a warm front moves openly, generously, making everything it touches slightly more alive. Maya moved through the world the way a surveyor moves, measuring, recording, making sure she understood the terrain before she put her weight on it. They were, in almost every measurable way, opposites. And they were, in every way that actually mattered, inseparable. Daniel Hargrove entered Leah's life 14 months before she died. He was 36 years old, tall, well-dressed, and employed in real estate development, the kind of work that in smaller cities like Asheville gave a man a particular kind of social currency, access to the right dinner parties, the right introductions, the right impression of success that could be projected at a distance without ever being examined up close. He and Leah met at a mutual friend's birthday gathering in downtown Asheville and, by multiple accounts, were inseparable from the first evening. Leah told Maya about him within a week. She used the word magnetic. She said she had never met someone who made her feel so immediately understood. She said he was different. Maya, who remembered that Leah had also described the stray cat she'd once adopted off a highway median as different, smiled and said she was happy for her and asked to meet him. She met him 3 weeks later at a dinner that Leah had organized with obvious care, new restaurant, nice wine, a seating arrangement that put Daniel across from Maya so the two of them could get to know each other. Maya would remember that dinner in precise detail for the rest of her life. She would remember that Daniel was charming in the specific way that requires effort, meaning the charm was visible. You could see it operating if you knew what to look for. The way a magician's hands move just slightly faster than the trick requires. He was attentive to Leah in the way a man is attentive when he knows he is being watched. He was funny in a way that made himself the center of the story, while appearing to celebrate the people around him. He asked Maya questions about her work and then, when she answered, moved the conversation back to himself with a fluency that suggested he had done it so many times he no longer noticed. Maya smiled through the dinner and said he was great when Leah asked her on the phone the next morning. Because what else do you say when your sister is in love with someone and all you have against him is a feeling you cannot name? The feeling, however, did not leave. Over the following months, as Leah and Daniel's relationship deepened and solidified, as they moved from dating to committed and began spending most of their time together, Maya kept a quiet, careful watch. She noticed the way Daniel's accounts of his own past shifted slightly depending on who he was speaking to, not dramatically, not in ways most people would catch, but enough that Maya, who remembered everything, began to keep a mental log of the inconsistencies. She noticed that Leah, who had always been a woman of enormous social energy, gradually began attending fewer group events, seeing fewer friends, orienting her schedule almost entirely around Daniel's preferences and availability. She noticed that when she called Leah on nights when Daniel was present, the conversation was shorter, more careful, punctuated by silences that had never been there before. She said nothing. She had no evidence. She had only a feeling, and feelings do not hold up in a conversation with a woman in love. The phone call came 11 months into Leah and Daniel's relationship. It was a Wednesday evening in August, warm, still light, at 7 o'clock, and Maya was at her kitchen table with a work project open on her laptop when her phone rang. It was Leah. Her voice was different, immediately lower, more careful, the way a person speaks when they are not entirely sure they are not being overheard. She told Maya she needed to tell her something. She said she had found something on Daniel's laptop 2 days earlier, something that had frightened her, and that she was planning to end the relationship. She did not tell Maya what she had found. She said she was not ready to talk about it fully yet, that she needed a few more days to think through what she was going to do. Maya asked if she was safe. Leah said yes. Maya asked if she wanted her to come over. Leah said no. She was fine. She just needed Maya to know. She said she loved her. Maya said she loved her back. They made a plan to have dinner that weekend and talk through everything. It was the last real conversation they would ever have. 3 days later, on a Saturday morning in early October, Leah Caldwell was found dead at the base of a 40-foot drop on a popular hiking trail in the mountains west of Asheville. Daniel Hargrove was the one who called 911. He told the responding officers that they had gone hiking together that morning, that Leah had suggested it, that they had been arguing near the upper ridge about the future of their relationship, and that she had stepped backward, lost her footing, and gone over the edge before he could reach her. He said he had tried. He said he had reached for her and she was already gone. He said he was devastated. He sat on a trail marker and answered every question the responding officers asked him. And he cried, and he looked, by every description in the initial reports, like a man in genuine shock. The investigation that followed lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks for a 32-year-old woman who had told her sister 3 days before her death that she had found something frightening on her boyfriend's laptop and was planning to leave him. 6 weeks during which the investigators spoke to Daniel multiple times, reviewed the scene, consulted the medical examiner's report, and ultimately determined that there was insufficient evidence to support a charge of homicide. The cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma, consistent with a fall. The manner of death was listed as undetermined, which in practical terms meant that it would be treated, for all intents and purposes, as accidental. The case was not closed, but it was, functionally, set aside, and Daniel Hargrove walked out of the last investigative interview, got into his car, and drove home. There were details in the investigation that Maya found impossible to reconcile with the conclusion it reached. There was the bruise on Leah's left forearm, approximately 4 inches long, positioned in a way that the medical examiner described as consistent with impact during the fall, but that Maya, who had looked at the photograph until she had it memorized, described as consistent with a hand, a specific grip, the kind of mark left not by a fall but by fingers wrapped around an arm before an arm is released. There was the testimony of a hiker named Barbara Owens, a retired school teacher from Arden, who had been on the trail that morning, and who told investigators that she had passed Daniel walking alone back toward the trailhead approximately 20 minutes before he placed the 911 call, walking calmly, hands in his pockets, not running, not calling out, not searching. Her account was in the investigative file. It did not appear to have changed the direction of the inquiry. And there was the phone call from 3 days before Leah died when she told her sister she had found something and she was afraid. The investigators noted it. They interviewed Daniel about it. He said Leah had found some old emails from a previous relationship and had overreacted. They appear to have accepted this explanation. Maya sat with all of this for 8 months. She is not a person who acts before she thinks, and what she was contemplating required more thought than almost anything a person can contemplate. She hired a private investigator in the spring after Leah died, a man named Terrence Webb, a former sheriff's deputy from Buncombe County, with 20 years of law enforcement experience and a reputation for methodical, quiet work. She paid him from her savings and gave him everything she had. He spent 6 weeks reviewing the original investigation and came back to her with a report that was careful in its language but clear in its implication. The case, Terrence told her, had not been worked to its full potential. There were threads, he said, that had not been pulled, and among those threads was something he had found in the course of his own background research on Daniel Hargrove, something the original investigators either had not uncovered or had not considered relevant. Daniel Hargrove had been in 2 prior serious relationships before Leah. Both had ended abruptly. In both cases, the women had left without much public explanation and had not, to any public knowledge, maintained contact with Daniel or their mutual social circle afterward. Terrence Webb tracked both women down. The first declined to speak at all. She had moved to another state, and, when Terrence reached her by phone, said only that she wished Maya well and that she had nothing to say about Daniel Hargrove and that she preferred it stay that way. The second woman agreed to meet. Her name was Christine, and she lived in Charlotte, and she met Maya at a coffee shop on a Saturday afternoon and sat across from her with both hands wrapped around a mug and told her story in the measured, careful way of someone who has rehearsed it in therapy many times before sharing it with a stranger. Christine said that Daniel had never physically harmed her. She was specific about that. She said what he had done was different and in some ways harder to describe because it left no marks and produced no incident reports and could not be pointed to clearly from the outside. She described a relationship in which she had gradually, almost without noticing, become someone she did not recognize, more isolated, more anxious, more convinced that her own perceptions of reality were unreliable because Daniel was so consistent and so calm and so reasonable whenever she questioned him that she had come to believe the problem was her. She said the relationship had ended when she finally told a close friend what was happening, and that friend had driven to her apartment at midnight, helped her pack a bag, and taken her to stay at her own house for 2 weeks. She said, when she heard about Leah, about what had happened on that trail, she had spent a week unable to eat. She said she had asked herself every day since whether there was something she could have done. Maya told her there was not. They sat together for a long time. Then Maya drove home. She thought about what Christine had told her. She thought about the bruise on Leah's arm and the hiker who had seen Daniel walking calmly away before he called for help and the phone call 3 days before her sister died. And she made a decision that Terrence Webb would later describe, when asked, as the most audacious thing he had ever witnessed a private citizen attempt. A decision that her therapist, Dr. Sandra Price, would say she had urged Maya against in almost every session they shared during the planning period. A decision that, when it eventually became public, would make Maya Caldwell one of the most debated private citizens in North Carolina in a decade, because half the people who heard what she had done called her a hero, and the other half called her something considerably more complicated. Maya Caldwell decided to get close to Daniel Hargrove. Not as an enemy, not as Leah's suspicious sister lurking at the edges of his social life. Close. Genuinely, convincingly, dangerously close. Close enough that he would trust her. Close enough that he would feel safe around her. Close enough that he might, eventually, in an unguarded moment, tell her something that the investigators and the district attorney and the entire weight of the North Carolina justice system had failed to extract from him in 6 weeks of formal inquiry. She spent 4 months preparing before she made any move at all. This is not a detail to pass over quickly. 4 months, during which she studied Daniel's routines, his social patterns, the coffee shop he went to on Tuesday mornings on Merrimon Avenue, the gym he used 3 times a week, the circle of mutual friends he still shared with Leah that he had, by all observable evidence, worked very deliberately to maintain after Leah's death as a way of performing the role of the grieving partner. She watched. She took notes. She consulted Terrence on everything. She spoke to Dr. Price in sessions that were, by the doctor's later account, among the most complex therapeutic conversations she had experienced in 20 years of practice, not because Maya was unstable or irrational, but because she was completely, almost frighteningly stable, sitting across from her therapist and laying out a plan with the clarity and precision of someone presenting a business proposal. She chose her entry point carefully. There was a mutual friend, a woman named Grace, who had been friends with both Leah and Daniel, and had, in the years since Leah's death, maintained cautious contact with both Maya and Daniel separately, uncertain of how to navigate the space between them. Grace was having a housewarming party in April. Daniel would be there. Maya had been invited but had previously declined. She called Grace and told her she had changed her mind, that she thought it might be time to try to be in a room with people again. Grace said she was proud of her. Maya thanked her and hung up the phone and sat at her kitchen table for a long time, in the particular quiet of a person who has just committed to something there is no clean way to undo. She got dressed for Grace's party with the kind of attention she had not given her appearance in over a year. Not because she wanted to impress anyone in any conventional sense, but because she understood, with cold clarity, that the first impression she made on Daniel Hargrove that evening would determine everything that came after it. She could not appear to be pursuing him. She could not appear to be watching him. She needed to appear to be, simply and naturally, a woman who had finally emerged from grief and was ready to be around people again, and who happened to be in the same room as him. She arrived at the party, spoke with Grace, made conversation with people she hadn't seen in months, and then, at a moment she had planned with as much care as any moment in her life, she walked across the room to where Daniel was standing by himself near the kitchen, held out her hand and said, with a warmth she had practiced until it felt real, "Daniel, it's been too long." He was, she would write in her journal that night, exactly as she remembered him, charming, present, performing, attentiveness with the fluid ease of someone who had been doing it for years. He seemed, if anything, relieved to see her. She suspected, and Terrence Webb would later confirm through his own separate observation, that Daniel had been somewhat socially cautious in the years since Leah's death, aware that certain people looked at him with questions in their eyes even if they never asked them aloud. Maya looked at him with none of that. She asked how he was. She told him she was doing better. She let him talk, which he did, at length, and when she eventually said she should circulate and said it was good to see him and walked away, she could feel without turning around that he was watching her go. The operation had begun. She did not rush. This is the part of this story that people, when they hear it, find most difficult to fully absorb, not the initial decision, not the courage required to be in the same room as him, but the pace of it, the deliberate, controlled, unhurried pace. Over the following 4 months, Maya ran into Daniel at 3 more social events. Their contact was always brief, always warm, always initiated with the energy of 2 people in a shared social circle who have found, to their mild mutual surprise, that they enjoy each other's company. She never sought him out directly. She let him come to her. She answered his questions about her life with carefully calibrated openness, enough to feel real, not enough to feel like disclosure. She laughed at his jokes. She remembered details from previous conversations and referenced them naturally. She was, in every observable way, simply a woman moving through the world and occasionally crossing paths with a man who happened to have dated her sister. He asked her to dinner 4 months after Grace's party. He sent a text message that was casual in tone but had, she would later note in her journal, clearly been composed and possibly recomposed before being sent the kind of message that is trying very hard to appear effortless. She waited 3 hours before responding. She said yes. They went to a restaurant in downtown Asheville on a Thursday evening, and by every account of what Maya recorded in her journal from that night, it was a pleasant, unremarkable dinner between two adults who had found something resembling connection in the wreckage of a shared loss. He paid. He walked her to her car. She drove home and sat in her driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. Then she opened her journal and wrote, Phase 2. They were in a relationship within 6 months of Grace's party. From the outside to Grace, to their mutual friends, to anyone who observed them without the knowledge of what was really happening, they appeared to be exactly what they appeared to be. Two people who had both loved Leah Caldwell and had found in each other a way of carrying that loss that was gentler than carrying it alone. People were, for the most part, careful about expressing their opinions to Maya directly, but she was aware, through the gentle questions Grace occasionally asked and the particular silences of certain friends when Daniel's name came up, that not everyone was comfortable with it. She understood. She noted their discomfort in her journal. She continued, Her journal from this period is a document unlike almost any other that has emerged from a case of this kind. It is methodical, precise, and written with a clarity that never wavers even in its most raw entries. It documents every conversation she had with Daniel in which the subject of Leah came up, and she was careful, patient, and strategic about bringing Leah up, doing it in ways that felt natural and grief-adjacent rather than interrogative, doing it in the language of shared loss rather than suspicion. She documented every inconsistency she noticed in the way Daniel spoke about the morning Leah died, compared to what he had told the police, and over 18 months there were several. The hike had been his idea in one telling and Leah's idea in another. The argument on the ridge had been about Leah wanting to move in together in one version and about Leah wanting to end the relationship in another. These were not dramatic contradictions. They were the kind of small shifts in a story that most people would never notice and that Maya wrote down every single time. She had also, by the 4th month of their relationship, made a decision that would ultimately determine the entire outcome of the case. North Carolina is a one-party consent state. This is a specific and important legal fact. In North Carolina, it is entirely lawful for one party to a conversation to record that conversation without the knowledge of the other party, provided that the person doing the recording is a participant in the conversation. Maya knew this. She had researched it thoroughly. She had confirmed it with Terrence Webb, who had confirmed it with a criminal defense attorney. And beginning in month 4 of the relationship, Maya started recording conversations. Not every conversation, not constantly, selectively, carefully, on evenings when something in the mood of the interaction felt open in a way that other evenings did not. When Daniel seemed relaxed in a particular way that she had come to recognize as the condition most likely to produce something unguarded, she recorded using her phone. She kept the recordings archived on an encrypted drive she kept at a location Daniel had no access to and no knowledge of. She documented each recording in her journal with the date, the duration, and a summary of what had been said. There was a moment, approximately 9 months into the relationship, that Maya wrote about in her journal in a way that is among the most difficult entries to read. She wrote that she had come home that evening from a work event and found Daniel in her apartment in a mood she had not seen in him before, not violent, not overtly threatening, but compressed, tightly controlled in the way of a man containing something he did not want visible. She wrote that she had watched his face in that moment and had understood something in her body that she had previously only understood in her mind. She wrote that she had understood, in that moment, what the last months of Leah's life had felt like from the inside. She wrote, I stayed calm. I made dinner. I reminded myself why I am here. But I did not sleep. She did not record anything from that evening. She added a note in her journal that read simply, "He is capable of it." She did not stop. This requires acknowledgement, because anyone who has read this far will have felt the impulse to ask, at what point does the decision become too dangerous? At what point does justice tip into something more reckless than heroic? Maya's therapist, Dr. Price, asked her exactly this in the session following that evening, and Maya's response, as Dr. Price would later describe it, was not defiant or dismissive. It was quiet, and it was clear, and it was the response of a woman who had already made her peace with the risk. She said, "I know what I am doing. I know what it costs. I am choosing to pay it." And she arrived at her next session the following week and continued. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening in March, 14 months into the relationship. They had been at Maya's apartment, drinking wine, talking in the circling, meandering way of a couple who had been together long enough to have covered most subjects and were now returning to them. The subject of Leah had come up, as it occasionally did, and Maya had guided the conversation in the direction she had learned to guide it. Not pressing, not probing, but creating the conditions of openness, of safety, of the sense that whatever was said in this room would be held gently and without judgment. She had the phone recording. She had been recording for 3 hours. And then Daniel Hargrove said, "She didn't give me a choice, Maya. You have to understand that. She was going to ruin everything. I didn't have a choice." He stopped. He had hurt himself. Maya watched his face move through the thing it moved through in that half-second. The awareness of what he had said, the calculation of damage, the decision about how to handle it. He laughed. The specific laugh of a man trying to transform a sentence into something that can be walked back. He said something about how that wasn't what he meant. How he just meant that the relationship had been impossible toward the end. How Leah had been so certain she was going to leave him, and it had felt inevitable. He poured more wine. He changed the subject, and Maya let him change it. She smiled, and she nodded, and she reached across the table and touched his hand, and inside she was completely, absolutely still. She had also, in the months before that evening, discovered something else. Something she had not planned to find, and whose discovery had required her to make a decision in real time in under 11 minutes, specifically, which is the amount of time she would later tell the investigators she had spent in Daniel's cloud backup on one occasion 3 months earlier. She had discovered his password by observation. He used the same combination of his childhood street address and birth year across multiple platforms, and she had seen him type it enough times to have it memorized without ever deliberately trying to memorize it. She had accessed his cloud account once. She had been shaking badly enough that she had dropped her phone twice. In 11 minutes, she had found and forwarded to herself 17 files. She had then closed the application and not accessed it again. What was in those files was this: a series of text messages recovered in a backup from 2 days before Leah died. They were between Daniel and a contact, stored only as an initial, the letter R. In those messages, Daniel described Leah as a problem. He used that exact word. He wrote that she had accessed something on his laptop that she should not have seen, and that he needed to manage the situation before she talked to anyone. He wrote those words: "Manage the situation." The final message in the chain, sent the evening before the morning Leah died, read, "It's handled. Don't contact me for a while." Maya sat with those files for 6 weeks. She read them until she could recite them. She thought about her sister on the trail. She thought about what Leah had known when she woke up that morning, whether she had known, whether some part of her had felt it before they left the apartment and before they reached the ridge and before the moment when whatever happened, happened. She thought about Chester, the chocolate Labrador with a torn ear, who had gone to live with a friend of Leah's after the funeral and who Maya visited sometimes on Saturdays. She thought about the ceramic owls on the windowsill and the gas station sandwiches on the beach in Brunswick County. Then she went to Terrence Webb. Then Terrence went to a criminal defense attorney named Patricia Morse, who had a reputation in the North Carolina legal community for the kind of cases that other attorneys described as walls impossible to climb, impossible to go around, requiring a completely different approach than anything in the standard playbook. Patricia Morse met with Maya for 3 hours on a Friday afternoon in May. She reviewed the audio recording. She reviewed the text message files. She asked Maya, in the careful language of an attorney who needed to understand exactly what she was dealing with before she said another word, exactly how she had obtained the text messages. Maya told her. Patricia Morse was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You understand that the method by which you obtained those files is going to be a significant problem." Maya said she understood. Patricia said, "And you understand that when this becomes public, and it will become public, the story is going to be as much about what you did as about what he did. People are going to have opinions about a woman who entered into a romantic relationship with a suspect in her sister's death in order to gather evidence against him." Maya looked at her and said, "Let them have opinions. What do we do next?" What they did next was end it. Cleanly, carefully, unremarkably. Maya ended the relationship with Daniel on a Friday evening in late May at his apartment with the directness and composure she had maintained throughout the entire operation. She told him she needed to focus on her own healing. She told him she thought they had helped each other through something difficult, but that she needed space. She hugged him at the door. She walked to her car. She drove directly from his apartment to the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office and asked to speak with a detective. She was carrying a folder. Inside the folder was everything she had built over 18 months. The journal, the recordings, the notes from Terrence Webb, the statement from Christine, the written account of Barbara Owens's observation on the trail, the documented inconsistencies in Daniel's various tellings of the morning Leah died. She set the folder on the table in front of the detective, and she said, "My sister was murdered. I know who did it, and I have proof." The arrest of Daniel Hargrove made the local news in Asheville on a Wednesday morning in September. Within 48 hours, the details of how the evidence had been gathered became public because, in a case of this nature, in a county of this size, with a story this singular, there was no possibility of containing it, and the public reaction was immediate, enormous, and precisely divided. Half the people who read the story called Maya Caldwell the most extraordinary woman they had ever heard of. Social media was flooded with messages addressed to her from strangers across the country, women, mostly, but not exclusively, who said they understood, who said they would have done the same, who said she was the embodiment of what love and loyalty actually look like when they are tested all the way down to the bone. The other half asked harder questions. Legal commentators asked about entrapment. Ethics journalists asked about the boundaries between grief and manipulation, about what it means for civil society when private citizens conduct undercover operations against people they suspect of crimes, about the precedent it set if a court were to validate what Maya had done by accepting the evidence it had produced. The legal proceedings lasted 14 months. Patricia Morse was exactly right that the text message files would be a problem. The trial judge ruled them inadmissible. They had been obtained through unauthorized access to a private account, and regardless of what they contained, the method of obtaining them could not survive a suppression hearing. It was a blow. Morse appealed. The appeals court upheld the ruling. The text messages were out. And Daniel Hargrove's defense team, which was good and which knew it, began to build its case around the argument that what remained the recording, the witness testimony, the circumstantial evidence accumulated by a grieving woman who had been living inside a hidden agenda for 18 months, was not sufficient to convict a man of murder beyond a reasonable doubt. They were wrong. What the jury heard over the course of a 3-week trial was this: the audio recording from the Tuesday evening in March, in which Daniel Hargrove's voice, clear and unmistakable, said the words, "She didn't give me a choice. She was going to ruin everything. I didn't have a choice." The testimony of Barbara Owens, the retired schoolteacher, who described in calm and precise detail seeing Daniel walking alone and unhurried back toward the trailhead approximately 20 minutes before the 911 call was placed. The testimony of Christine, who had finally, after years of silence, decided that the weight of not speaking was heavier than the weight of speaking, and who described in full the pattern of behavior she had experienced in her relationship with Daniel Hargrove in language that was careful and specific, and gave the jury a picture of a man that no number of tailored suits or composed performances in the courtroom could entirely contradict. The testimony of Terrence Webb, who walked the jury through the documented inconsistencies in Daniel's multiple accounts of the morning Leah died, and the testimony of Maya herself. Maya was on the stand for 4 hours. The defense attorney was talented, and the cross-examination was aggressive, designed to reframe her, to transform her in the jury's eyes from a grieving sister into something colder and more calculated, a woman who had weaponized intimacy, who had conducted a deliberate deception over more than a year, who could not be trusted because she had demonstrated so comprehensively that she was capable of presenting a face to the world that had nothing to do with what she was actually feeling. The defense attorney asked her whether she had ever had genuine feelings for Daniel Hargrove. She said no. He asked whether she had ever felt guilty about deceiving him. She paused. Then she said, "I felt guilty every day that my sister was not alive and he was. That is the only guilt I am prepared to discuss in this room." The jury deliberated for 11 hours across 2 days. They returned on a Tuesday afternoon with a verdict of guilty of second-degree murder. The sentence was 18 to 22 years in a North Carolina state correctional facility. Daniel Hargrove, when the verdict was read, turned to look at Maya. The people in the gallery who were close enough to see her face described what they saw not as triumph, not as relief, not as grief, but as something that did not have a common name. A settling, they said. A stillness. As if something that had been held at tension for 3 years had finally, after an extraordinarily long time, been allowed to rest. She closed her eyes briefly. Her hands were in her lap. Someone beside her took her hand. She did not move for a long time. Outside the courthouse, she gave a single statement. She said, "Leah was the best person I have ever known. She deserved a long life, and she deserved justice from a system that had every resource available to find it and chose not to look hard enough. I hope she knows she got it." Then she walked to her car. She did not take questions. The aftermath carried its own complications. Prosecutors reviewed Maya's conduct and declined to bring any charges against her. The recording was legal under state law, and the other actions she had taken, while ethically complex, did not rise to the level of criminal conduct in the judgment of the district attorney's office. Daniel's family filed a civil lawsuit. It was settled out of court for an amount that was never disclosed. Maya left Asheville after the trial. She does not speak publicly. She has not given interviews. The journal she kept during the 18 months of the operation has been studied by legal scholars and journalism ethics researchers and referenced in discussions of vigilante justice, one-party consent laws, and the gaps in the formal justice system that leave families of victims without recourse. She was last seen, by the account of a former colleague who ran into her at a gas station outside of Boone 18 months after the verdict, with Chester in the back seat, the chocolate Labrador with the torn ear, who had come to live with her after the trial. The former colleague said Maya looked well. She said she seemed quiet in a way that was different from the quiet of grief. She said she seemed settled. Maya saw her across the parking lot, raised a hand in greeting, got into her car, and drove away. And that is where we leave this story. Not with a verdict, not with a sentence, with a woman and a dog, and 2 words that carry everything inside them that the law could not contain. Because the law is a system built for proof. And some things, the particular shape of grief, the particular texture of a sister's laugh, the particular weight of knowing and not being believed, exist in a register that proof cannot reach. Maya Caldwell reached into that register and stayed there for 18 months and came back with the only thing she had been after since the morning she sat in a parking lot with an engine running and a bag of apples on the passenger seat, and learned that the word afterward was the only word left. She came back with the truth. What the system chose to do with it was the system's decision. What she chose to do with it was hers.